in, oh, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. So please just sit tight and then we'll get stuck into it. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So welcome again. Thank you for joining today's event. So today we're going to be talking about lessons learned on how to sell productive use of energy or PUE products in last mile communities. My name is Emma Collenbrander and I'm head of the Global Distributors Collective. The GDC is hosted by Practical Action alongside implementing partners Hystra and BOP Inc. And this event has come about thanks to funding from EEP Africa. So if we can jump to the next slide, thank you. Here is our agenda for today. I'll just spend a few minutes introducing the topic before we move into a panel conversation with 4 last mile distribution companies, and then we'll have open Q&A. Please feel free to drop questions into the chat as we go along, and our speakers are hopefully going to be able to answer some of those questions in the chat as we go. So we have a pretty nice lineup today. You're going to be hearing from 4 last mile distribution companies with diverse experiences in selling PUE products. So first up is Fatma Muzo from Solar Sister Tanzania. For the last 2 years, Solar Sister have been working to pilot a whole range of off-grid PUE products, including egg incubators, water pumps, fishing lights, barber kits, and solar home system entertainment packs. Next is Russell Lysite from VITALITE Zambia. VITALITE is actively selling surface water pumps, and they've also piloted submersible water pumps and egg incubators. Third, we have Stuart Crane from Village Infrastructure Angels, which operates in Vanuatu, Indonesia, and Honduras. VIA has got a very long list of PUE products that they have sold and trialed. So they've sold and installed over 600 solar mills. They're currently piloting solar washing machines, solar e-cookers, multifunctional dryers, efficient ice boxes, and they've previously piloted solar water pumps and fridge freezers. And our final panelist is Aaron Leopold from EnerGrow in Uganda. EnerGrow is actively selling an array of grid-connected PUE products, including carpentry and metalwork tools, fridges, freezers, sewing machines, juice machines and blenders, and anything that a small kiosk shop might need. And they're also looking at ag processing and, interestingly, e-bikes. So as you can see, it's quite a diverse range of products that these companies have some experience in. So I think they'll have some interesting insights to share today. A bit of background to this webinar. In recent years, we have seen a massive growth in the number of last mile distributors who are selling PUE products. In 2019, only 6% of GDC members were selling these products, but in 2021, that number is 35%. And this is also the product category that holds the greatest interest to members. So 21% of members told us that they want to start selling PUE products in the future. Why the growing interest in PUE? A whole bunch of reasons, including consumer demand and high impact potential. These products are increasingly affordable thanks to technological innovation and the rise of pay-go. Distributors are looking to sell higher margin products and upsell existing customers to try and make sustainable business models. And we've got funders and actors like Efficiency for Access who are really pushing to translate energy access into opportunities for income generation. So given the growth in interest in PUE products, it's perhaps unsurprising that this webinar is a direct response to member demand because companies want to avoid reinventing the wheel on their PUE journeys. So we hope that the lessons and insights shared today are helpful for those members who've come to us asking for advice and insights around how to sell PUE products. We also hope that this webinar will help shed light on the reality of distributor experiences. Because what we see is that there's a lot of interest and a lot of money that's flowing into the PUE sector, but those companies that are actively working to deliver those technologies to last mile communities, we feel like their stories have not really been systematically told, and that's a piece of the puzzle that we're trying to fill. And that's also why we are currently developing a piece of research that brings together insights from 15 distributors across 10 different countries, and that includes the distributors that you'll hear from today. So do keep an eye out for that report, which will be published in July. Next slide, thank you. So a note on definitions. What are PUE products? And actually, Aaron provided a really nice definition the other day. He said, PUE products are just energy-enabled products that at the end of the week put more money into customers' pockets. And I think that pretty much covers it. So PUE products cover both the products that are used at a household level to enable cost savings, and also products that are used commercially to generate additional income. And at the GDC, we are most interested in those PUE products where there's a significant potential market, there's high demand, and there's high potential for impact and improved business sustainability. So that includes products like water pumps, egg incubators, food processing equipment, and so on. These kind of products have distinct and complex logistical, financing, and after-sales service requirements. And we're not as focused on products, like hair clippers and fishing lights and solar home systems that are used for productive purposes, because even though those products are very impactful, they're quite familiar for distributors selling beneficial products, particularly distributors who are already selling off-grid solar lights and appliances like fans and TVs and so on. Next slide, please. So a couple of final points of context based on the interviews that we've done to date with distributors selling PUE products. Firstly, PUE is a very nascent product category. So the vast majority of distributors are still in the testing phase. Over and over again, we have heard from distributors that they really underestimated how hard it would be to sell PUE products, and that while customer demand is absolutely there, they haven't yet been able to effectively meet that demand. There are many reasons for that. But what we've heard from distributors that the biggest barriers include there just aren't enough market-ready products and supply chains are underdeveloped. Consumer financing requirements are very high and working capital requirements are therefore also very high. PUE products are more technical and complex than the products they're used to selling. And these products require significant customization, customer education, and after-sales support. Despite this, distributors see PUE as a product category that is worth pursuing, and that's mostly because where sales have been successful, distributors report genuine impact. So just to take two examples from the companies that you will hear from today, VIA has seen time savings of up to 10 to 30 hours per month, with the majority of that time being used for income generation, and that's helping customers to earn up to $30 extra per month. And similarly, EnerGrow has seen their average customer incomes increase by 69% within 6 months of purchasing a product. So I think those are some pretty kind of powerful endorsements of the potential impact for PUE products. So I think that's enough from me. As I say, we've got a report coming out next month that has a wealth of fascinating insights from distributors. And I've learned a lot from speaking with them over the last couple of weeks, and very happy to have these four here with us today to share their lessons with you firsthand. So I think if we can stop screen share, then we can see our speakers. We're going to jump in straight into a conversation. We have heard from a lot of last mile distributors that one of the biggest challenges they face is finding appropriate market-ready productive use products to sell. So my first question for you, Fatma, I know that Solar Sister undertook a 2-year pilot project to identify, source and test a range of different PUE products in Tanzania. So can you tell us, was this a challenge that you faced? And can you tell us a bit about how you worked to overcome that challenge?
Okay, thank you very much. So,
can you put your video on, Fatma, so that we can see you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me, can you see me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so for us, mostly I would start by saying PUE itself is a new concept in Tanzania. So as when we started the 2 years back piloting this program in Tanzania, it was a new concept for everyone. So starting from even the government, other renewable stakeholders, going up to the communities, it was a new concept. And it was really challenging for us to advocate until people get to understand the whole concept of the PUE. And as we all understand, PUE is all about buying the products, using the products to generate income and pay back to the suppliers, of which most of our targeted customers were not aware of this. They didn't know, as compared to the customers which we used to have. They are the type of customers of which they used to buy the product and use the products and not use the product to generate the income. Also, the complexity of this involves the customers and distributors themselves. Both of them, they have to engage on the business. The supplier is doing business. Also, the customer has to generate income by using the product, by selling the product. So you find it was a little bit challenging. Also, getting the appropriate suppliers was the biggest challenge for us, especially locally. It was really challenge in terms of getting the right products, whether it's affordable or it's financed, and also getting the after-sales support was really challenging for us, as most of the suppliers were outside of the country. So you could find whenever we ordered the product, it would take up to 3 or 4 months. So that was the biggest challenge we did. So how we tried to overcome, we reached out to our umbrella organization, TAREA, Tanzania Renewable Energy Association, and they linked us with few locally available suppliers, of which we started while we were working on the targeted products which we planned to sell, to pilot during that. But that's the real challenge which we got: the availability of the suppliers, and also the concept of PUE in Tanzania is something new. So, and I think we still need to advocate it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Fatma. I also remember from speaking to your colleague, Catherine from Solar Sister, that something she mentioned that was challenging was that building and managing partnerships with suppliers was also hard because a lot of the companies in the space are still vertically integrated, the technology companies, meaning that some suppliers are also competitors, which I thought was quite interesting. It's kind of a look at, what the off-grid solar market, the lighting market was, sort of 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was one of the challenges which really affected us, because on that way, if your supplier is also a competitor, so when it comes to setting up the prices, we got the challenge because we looked somehow expensive compared to them. So it was very challenging for us to get the matching with the suppliers in terms of pricing, as well as into alignment into the partnership, like the coverage areas where we should operate, because we would find the areas where we target to pilot, that's where our suppliers were also there. So it was really challenging. Yeah.
Thanks, Fatma. So Russell, I want to turn to you. I know that you are currently working to standardize and professionalize the way that you run pilots based on the experiences that you had piloting PUE products. So can you tell us a bit about what that looks like and why this more kind of rigorous standardized approach is necessary?
Sure, thanks, Emma. I guess I tend to think about pilots as change activity. So fundamentally, when we pilot a product, and this could go for products beyond PUE, you're introducing change and you're introducing risk. So what we're looking to do as we standardize in that space is to standardize the way that we identify new opportunities and decide upon them. So it might be that a supplier has approached us. It might be that our field sales teams have got feedback from customers saying that this is an aspect of our portfolio that's missing. It can come from a number of different places. We then need to decide in a reasonably standard way, how do we figure out which opportunities fit well with our current capabilities, or whether we need to build new capabilities in order to deliver them. If we need to build new capabilities, we're adding risk again, and we need to find ways to mitigate that. We also try to design our pilot activities. So we've got things like standardized objectives. We try to make sure that we are piloting things like the sales process, technical aftercare, customer issue resolution, marketing approaches, these sorts of aspects of what we're trying to deliver. And one of the things I've been really keen on is making sure that our internal stakeholders, so sort of veto power that says this pilot cannot go out into the field, cannot become real until I, as the team leader, say I'm happy with what my contribution is. So for example, I might be in operations and I've got a team that's delivering technical aftercare. I should be able to say that this pilot can't launch until the relevant technical aftercare processes are in place. I think it's also can be quite useful to build the delivery of milestones that relate to the pilot into the performance plans of the various individuals that are required to deliver the activity, and also to build in a standardized approach to conducting lessons learned or retrospectives. I know sometimes people call them retrospectives, so that you can determine, was this pilot actually successful? Is there a need to maybe do a second pilot where we've still got some uncertainties or the risks are too high? Or are we now in a position where we can roll out to the rest of the network? So for example, where we've got 35 shops and about 600 agents now, we would pilot only, for example, with maybe 3 or 4 shops and perhaps with 30 of those agents, so that we're managing that risk and we're trying to keep the risk kind of controlled before we would decide whether or not to roll out elsewhere. I also think it's important, after you've done all of that work, for there to be a very formal handover from your pilot status into that business as usual status. And most of these techniques, or most of these approaches, are kind of relatively standard for change activity. It's just that typically in most organizations, even quite large organizations, change delivery techniques and processes are not really considered mandatory. So you get lots of very passionate, highly enthusiastic, what you might call amateurs from a change perspective, trying to deliver quite complex change without the tools to do it. So I would really encourage everyone to think about how these sorts of basic change management tools can be introduced to their organizations. And they don't need to be that complicated. I think it's a mindset as much as anything else.
Thanks, Russell. And I think a lot of that is, applies sort of across products and projects for distributors and other companies. But I think we have heard a lot that distributors have really struggled with pilots of PUE products because they are so much more complex and technical. And yeah, I think we've heard a lot of kind of failed pilots, which is a shame. So I think that's very good advice. We've also heard a lot from distributors that they've struggled with understanding and managing customer expectations around PUE products, and that there's sometimes like a misalignment around what customers want and are able to pay for versus kind of what's on offer. So can you kind of share some of your experiences around that and any advice that you have for other distributors on how to manage customer expectations around these products?
Sure. I guess there are kind of 2 aspects to that. So one part of it is ability to pay versus willingness to pay. It's all well and good doing some sort of desktop paper-based exercise to ask people questions about what they would be prepared to spend money on. But frankly, there's no better test than putting a product out into the market. So one of the reasons why I'm quite keen to keep our pilots quite narrow is because you manage down the risk that's related to what products you put into the market. The second piece around the customers themselves, if I think about, in fact, you might be able to see just behind me, I've got a solar home system on the wall. These are quite plug and play. So if I give this to a customer of ours, even if they're not particularly literate, they can take it home, stick it on their wall, put the solar panel on their roof, and they're pretty much good to go. And they know whether the system is working, because if the light doesn't come on, they know that they've got a problem. Whereas, as you pointed out, Emma, a lot of the PUE products have got a much greater level of complexity to them. So I think we all as distributors need to think about what information do we need to provide to the customer before the purchase, during the sales discussion, and quite critically after the sale has taken place, so that we can manage them through the customer experience that we want them to have and help them maximize the productivity of whatever the productive use appliance is, whether that's an egg incubator or a pump, each of which will have its own kind of ideal set of processes that the customer should be familiar with in order to use it to its best effect.
Awesome, thanks, Russell. There are some good questions coming through on the chat, and Jeff's asking a good question about financing, and we're coming to some questions on financing in a minute, so that's very relevant. But before we do, Stuart, be just good to hear from you a little bit on this question of customer expectations, because of course part of managing customer expectations is about how you market and position PUE products vis-a-vis alternatives. So what advice do you have for other distributors on how to do that based on the products that you've had experience selling?
I think one of the key characteristics of PUE is a longer payback period. And I think most, sort of understand that fairly quickly in the process, but Back in 2005, when I started selling solar LED lights, it was easy. It was a 6-month payback period. It was a $20 or $30 product. People looked at it, saw it compared to a kerosene light, asked how much it was, and literally paid for it on the spot. That doesn't happen with PUE. You don't have a 6-month payback period on any PUE that I know of. The closest we've got so far seems to be a solar laundromat, a washing machine. Women are throwing their clothes in there left, right, and centre, and seem to be happy to pay for that time saving. That might have a 1 or 2 year payback. Others more like a 3 to 6 year payback. So the financing and how this is delivered to the market is important. I've also seen that practically every solar mill pilot project has been put next to a diesel mill. That's the absolute worst possible thing you can do. It's like putting a Toyota Corolla next to a Lamborghini. You want to get the solar mills as far away from those diesel mills as you can, where people have had to travel the most distance. It's actually to help them not have to travel to a diesel mill, to be able to decentralize milling. So yeah, I think there's a lot of market understanding that needs to happen, and it doesn't have to be just focused on B2C and consumer financing. You can also position your product for like large agri companies. We made was to the biggest rice company in Papua New Guinea. Took 180 mils when we put our solar rice mill next to the diesel mills that they were buying and giving to farmers. And the farmers never had the fuel to run the mill. So it wasn't working. But if they could give them a solar mill, there was no fuel to buy. So a bit slower, but we positioned that, through PSS in Papua New Guinea at the agricultural field days, head to head with the diesel mills. And we were able to, give a convincing argument why a large agribusiness should change what it's doing. So there's, many paths to Rome, but none of them are easy.
Thanks, Stuart. So Aaron, I'm going to turn to you before we grapple with this question of financing, because I'm seeing a lot of questions come in about that in the chat. So EnerGrow is a little bit different from most last mile distributors because you work in grid connected communities and you sell commodified PUE products. So you don't necessarily have the same challenges around procurement and sort of managing customer expectations, but you do have the same challenge of not being a technology company and being technology agnostic. So can you talk a little bit about that?
In terms of piloting and figure out which technologies to sell? Yeah. So thanks, Emma. I mean, I can echo what everybody else has said. We undertook almost 3,000 customer surveys before we started, in the years before I joined EnerGrow. And just kind of to take a step back and ask the question of why do we focus differently? Why are we looking at grid connected communities? So the other side of last mile distribution that doesn't get talked a lot about is the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of communities that are connected to the grid, and there are also communities that are being connected to mini grids all the time. And those communities also don't have access to high quality electronic shops or high quality tools. And also they don't have a great understanding of what tools are out there for them. If a carpenter, for instance, is looking to get to electrify their carpentry operation, what tools can they get? How can they get a warranty, et cetera? These are huge questions for millions of people out there that have recently been connected to grid powered electricity. And so, very, very much like what Russell said, you can do all the questionnaires and market assessments that you want, but the proof is very much in the pudding. And, we sell all sorts of different equipment, which you listed before, carpentry equipment, welding equipment. We're moving into agro-processing, electric mobility. We're sort of a broad spectrum productive use supplier. And, we really, at the end of the day, are just listening to our customers and helping them find what they need. We are really working with our clients on a day-to-day basis to understand how to improve our catalog. And we've actually had a lot of challenges on the fundraising side because of this. When you're a solar water pumping company or a solar refrigeration company, it's really easy for investors to understand that. But going back to your point earlier, Emma, there's been very little money put into last mile distribution, R&D, in terms of business models and figuring out which how to sell and what to sell and how to train customers. And if we want to solve the energy access problem, and if we want to help improve incomes, it's not just the technology companies that need to get the Series A's, it's the distribution and training and sales companies that need those investments as well. And we haven't cracked that egg. We see MTN and Safaricom and paint shops in every village. If you drive around rural Africa, you see a lot of mobile companies and paint advertising all over the place. But you don't see a lot of electronics advertising. You do see some, D-Lite and M-Copa and all this stuff. But we need the productive use shops in all these communities, and we haven't really figured out how to do that as a sector yet. So we do face all of those similar challenges. And I'll just leave it at that because that was a question. But oh my gosh, there's so much more to talk about.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, so I'm going to come to this question on financing because it's come up a lot in the chat. So we know that productive use products tend to be more expensive than the products distributors usually carry. So often they do need longer payment plans than a product like a solar home system. So I think, Russell, you are still here. Brilliant. Do you think you could quickly answer the question of to what extent you have explored outsourcing consumer financing to third parties?
Sure, I was just writing something in the chat on that, so maybe it's easier for me to cover it. So I thought I saw a question from Rebecca, I think, on this. I guess our view is that PAYGO is a reasonably well understood risk mitigation for default risk. So if we can introduce PUE that's got PAYGO as an incentive for the customer to keep paying, then we would choose that. Some products, the PAYGO functionality can come with an extra cost that one might feel is prohibitive, but I think we would always start there. We're also, as I guess you're suggesting, we're also keen to find local financial services providers who've got appetite to engage, in this case, with smallholder farmers, but that is proving a bit challenging. It seems, at least in Zambia, I can't speak for other countries, but at least in Zambia, their risk appetite is quite low. So the sorts of rates that they're offering are prohibitive for the end beneficiaries. And I'm, at the moment at least, I'm of the view that unless they get some additional risk mitigation vehicles like guarantees, for example, I think UNCDF are starting to introduce some forms of guarantee. There's also the African Guarantee Fund, but until some of these local banks are offering lending backed by those guarantees, I suspect that the prices will remain too high, which is a big missed opportunity, I think. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Russell. And Fatma, I know Solar Sister also looked a lot at how you could outsource consumer financing rather than do that in-house, because you don't do consumer financing for your usual sort of basket of products. So can you tell us a bit about whether Russell's experience matches your experience?
I think for us, I would say we got the consumer financing challenge because although we saw high demand for the PUE products during our piloting project, for the 2 years pilot project, particularly for the egg incubators and the water pump, but in the end, we found that the customers were not willing to take out the loan for the product, which were not tried and tested like a solar home system, because by then, while we were piloting, most of the customers did not have the product, and the products were completely new to the customers. So they were not confident enough on if the products are of the expected quality, and they will give them the result as what they expect. So that's the challenge which we faced. And but we also tried to create our own financing plan, which was a credit plan, in order to encourage and motivate the customers at least to get a loan, though we did not have a financing plan. So we gave them the credits of which the consumers could pay on installment basis for the product. But that was very risky for Solar Sister, since we are not the financing company. And by that time, we did not have any collection mechanism like a PAYGO. But we also try to approach several microfinance institutions to partner with us, but most of them did not have a solar loan. Especially in Tanzania, most of the microfinance institutions, they are still not aware of the solar loans. So the few who had their loan at very low ceiling, and which could not fit in to the PUE products.
Thanks. And I think we've heard this beyond PUE products. Very, very few distributors have been able to successfully outsource consumer financing to MFIs or local banks for a whole range of reasons. And on the PAYGO question, I mean, PAYGO is obviously like a model that can work really well for PUE products, but not in all markets. I was speaking this morning to one of our members based in Papua New Guinea, and that is not a market that is, in any way ready for PAYGO. And I think they feel a lot of frustration because there's a big push for them to adopt a PAYGO model that they just know is not going to work because of the, the lack of mobile money and the expense of data and phone calls in Papua New Guinea, which mean the idea of setting up some kind of call center is just off the cards. So Stuart, can you tell us a bit about some of the approaches that you've tested to improve affordability? Because you're also working in markets where PAYGO doesn't always work.
Yeah, in fact, we worked in markets where PAYGO didn't even exist. We were the first company to bring PAYGO to Vanuatu, to Sumber Island in Indonesia, to Gracia Dios in Honduras. And we accompanied it with the classical lights, like Green Light Planet home systems mostly, because we needed to generate more revenue out of the villages. So that was an important thing to understand too, that we couldn't deploy solar mills just by themselves. They wouldn't generate enough revenue to even cover the costs out to the village and back. So they had to be basically stacked on top of solar lights to make any kind of viable business. They couldn't really be. And we financed it ourselves. So there was no one who was going to finance it. That was obvious from the get-go. USAID Powering Agriculture were great coming in, AFD, the French came in, DFAT came in, IDB in Honduras. And to this day, we've had very little interest, practically zero, in providing finance for such technologies. In fact, Sunfunder came in and deliberately said, we'll fund the establishment for a year of installing these, but we won't take the long-term lending risk, because they just were not committed to that longer 3 to 6 year period that you need to amortize some of these technologies over. They don't pay off in just 1 year like lights. So it's a tough market, and it will remain so until we get more and more data through grant funded and concessional capital funded examples, and investors start to get a bit braver, maybe bundling them into solar mini grids, which already are looking at 10-year paybacks or without subsidy. That might have some better opportunity. Now, that's certainly what they did with micro hydro mini grids in Nepal in the 80s and the 90s. So it'd be good to see productive uses bundled in with mini grids instead of added on later. But at the moment, it's totally vertically integrated and mostly through grant capital.
Thanks. But Stuart, you also have an interesting experience working with some of your partners in doing non-cash payments. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes, one of the things we found, which was certainly amplified during coronavirus, was sometimes cash was not easy to pay. Milling for centuries has sometimes been paid through 10% of the crop, or other parts of what's been processed being left at the mill for payment. So we adopted that, but we also expanded on it because we didn't want to take food out of people's mouths necessarily if they didn't have surplus. So we also said, what could you make that we could sell? In Sumba in Indonesia was already buying bamboo from farmers. So for her to be able to go out to a farmer and instead of paying cash for the bamboo, she could actually swap it for a solar light or some milling service this was the start of our non-cash payment program. It's a very tiny percentage of the overall program, but it has been really illustrative, you know, how people can turn time savings into a sellable product, and then we monetize that by selling the product.
Thanks, Stuart. Sorry, I was just dropping in a link in the chat to the article that Sumba has done on their work with non-cash payments. So I will share that with everyone now.
Yeah, please note that she drew the line at anything with legs anymore. The too many chickens ran away. And watch it with fresh fish for refrigerators. I ate most of my sushi payments, so you got to be careful.
Okay, so Aaron, I guess similar question for you. Can you tell us about what approaches you have tested to increase affordability, how you've kind of managed payment plans there? And also be good if you can touch on, as a sort of second question, the question that Dan Waldron has raised in the chat about to what extent you think there's an opportunity to work with other distributors to finance their sales, given you are effectively a microfinance institute yourselves.
Yeah, so the first question was on, on trading.
No, sorry. So the first question is around financing. So what approaches have you tested to increase affordability? Yeah.
Yeah, no, so we are basically a microfinance company, as you said, but the idea that we want, so essentially we don't want to be in every village that we are working in, and we want to be working through partners as much as possible. So we are essentially a microfinance company today, but as our business model, as we learn more about how to scale this work, we really want to be working through our mini grid partners, through SACCOs and through other local lenders to be able to basically both finance and train our customers to be better microfinance customers and also better small business people. And the financing of small businesses is, of course, costly. And one of the questions that we always get from donors who we are talking to about our work is, you know, how can we reduce interest rates? And the question that we get from investors who we talk to is, you know, how can you operate with low interest rates? These low interest rates, you should be charging higher interest rates. So we have these competing pressures from people who want to see a return versus people who want to see essentially, you know, the lowest cost products to the poorest people. And there's a massive tension there. So, you know, right now, the government of DRC is working with IFC with funding from a variety of different donors on bringing, they're calling them not macro grids, meso grids or something, to massive cities in DRC, where there's 1 million person cities that have no power. And when we look at bringing productive use appliances and microfinance to those communities, it's going to, you know, triple the cost of refrigeration and whatever. Someone's drilling next door to me, unfortunately. Why don't I leave it at that, and I hope they'll stop.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so Aaron has touched a little bit on this point around training. So I think because, as we've talked about, these productive use products tend to be more complex, more technical. They do need more customer education, more customer support. Fatma, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you went about training your agents, because obviously this training needs to be provided at both the agent level and then at the customer level. So yeah, how did you go about equipping your agents to sell these kinds of products, and what lessons did you learn?
So we trained a total of 50 women entrepreneurs to install, sell, and use the PUE products. And how did we train them? So we divided them into smaller groups with samples, and everyone, so that everyone can participate, can see it, and can practice, like touching the product, testing the product. So when they're in the few groups, it's easier to train for the PUE products than when they are in the bigger groups. So we divided them into smaller groups for them to be able to practice well. We also made reference materials for them to practice and use it for while selling, so that they can be able to describe the product. And those materials, we put them in terms of side sellers, which is like a kind of brochure which contains the product information, pictures, and the contact for the entrepreneurs. So these were very useful for our women entrepreneurs during the training. And I would say the lesson learned in the, I would say, PUE training requires more frequently refresher training, coaching, and mentoring, especially if you are dealing with the underserved communities, because most of the PUE product requires technical skills. And they need more practices. So if you are working with underserved communities, you find most of them completed their education levels long years ago, and they are not very familiar with this new technology. So if you don't support them frequently, they tend to forget even some on how to use the product. So frequent training, support, coaching, and mentoring is well needed. Also, I would say while preparing the training materials for the PUE products, you should make sure the materials are user-friendly, they're simple, and they're more practical. So, and they can either have more photos and pictures, because most people in the rural communities, they understand well when they see the pictures or photos of the products.
Thanks, Fatma. The other thing I think is interesting when we're talking about agent training is that distributors are used to having all their agents selling quite a wide basket of products, but with PUE products, that's a bit different, and increasingly distributors are sort of having to set up specialized units of agents who are, intensely trained in a particular type of product, which is kind of a new model for distributors, and presents its own kind of challenges. So Aaron, I don't know how that drilling is going in your background. You good? Okay, because I wanted to ask you about the customer training and support that you offer, because obviously for a lot of these products it's a lot more intensive. So can you tell us about what that training looks like for EnerGrow?
Sure, they've stopped, but I am fairly certain it's going to start again, in which case I will just mute and then I can type. So the training that we're doing is really basic accountancy training with a bit of safety training as well. But we're partnering with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. We're developing a collaboration with them to develop or to bring large scale training through their network of farmer field schools. They have over 1,500 farmer field schools in Uganda alone, and across the continent they have similar networks. And we're really trying to work through larger partners like them, as well as there's vocational TVET institutions and technical vocational training education centers across the world. And we're trying to figure out how we can collaborate with entities such as those public institutions and other sort of like quasi-public institutions to really figure out how we can bring training alongside our technologies, where EnerGrow doesn't have to be the trainer, because that is not our expertise. We do not want to become a microfinance school. What I was trying to mention before in terms of scaling our work and the Congo example is, if we want to bring productive uses everywhere, how can we do that without physically being everywhere ourselves? And the same sort of approach is being taken with training. So we're looking at some app-based training. We're looking at gamifying training, similar to how Duolingo, the language learning app, has gamified language learning. We're looking at gamifying accountancy training through our app, so that we can create incentives for people to be good customers. Financial incentives. We're still looking for funding for this work, in case there's any investors on the call looking at real innovative ways to build our impact and build our ability to provide returns to investors as well, by providing a really quantified training experience that is also leveraging the existing educational and training infrastructure out there. And we've taken this broad approach because, as we mentioned before, we are a broad spectrum productive use supplier. We're not focusing on one or two things. We're focusing on the same things that the governments are focusing on. rural economies are largely agrarian, and there's huge networks of agrarian support out there. And so we're trying to work through them in as much as possible. And same with the other vocational training that we're trying to work on. We're developing those in collaboration with those TVETs, but also trying to work through TVETs also as a pipeline for customers. You know, all the TVETs, they're graduating tailors, dressmakers, carpenters, metal workers all the time. And a lot of those people want to start their own businesses, or they will get hired by businesses that don't have access to microfinance for upgrading their work either. And we're trying to work through those schools as a way to broaden our impact while also working with customers that are more financially secure and therefore able to be good customers for our business.
Awesome, thanks, Aaron. So on the note of customer support, we know that some distributors are being quite proactive in building market linkages to help customers to realize potential gains from productive use products. Stuart, I think you are one of those companies. Can you talk a little bit about some of the steps that you've taken to make sure that customers have some of those B2B links and support in place?
Yeah, so as mentioned with the non-cash payments system, we're a very participatory partner in actually distributing their product from the villages to local or national or international customers. So it's only a small example. We haven't done a lot of it, but it is where we're looking at a customer not as just a customer, but as a producer, as a prosumer, as we call it in the grid-connected solar industry in richer countries. But when you can't sell the electrons to the grid, you need to turn those electrons into something and sell that instead. So the off-grid prosumer is possible, just a bit more complicated. Others didn't need it. Others just were making coconut oil anyway, but they were grating coconuts by hand. And so for them to just get a solar electric coconut grater in there, saved them a huge amount of manual work, but they could still make their sales themselves. Others, with a little bit of support from local Department of Industry, made up stuff we didn't even dream of. So the villagers out in remote Vanuatu started making cassava flour, and then vacuum packaging that and selling it to their relatives near the capital city. That reduced the volume you needed to ship cassava dramatically. Cassava is full of water, and it's a bulky crop with a lot of air gaps when you ship it. So export cost was absolutely slashed when they started shipping cassava flour instead, which if you rehydrate it with water, it just becomes like freshly grated cassava, but takes a lot less time to prepare. And others started making ground spices and lemongrass powder. Apparently you put pumpkin powder, dried up sweet potato powder into a soup. It tastes like soy sauce. Who knew? So I would probably say for every time when we actually helped people helped themselves probably 2 or 3 or 4 times more often. They were coming up with stuff that we hadn't even thought of.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, so I think we've actually answered all the questions that were in the chat, which is pretty nice. And we still have 10 minutes to go. So I'm very happy to keep asking questions, but I will just pause for a minute and open up. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask? In which case you can just unmute yourself and ask directly. And Aaron, Stuart, and Fatma, that can also include you guys if you'd like to ask a question. Go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for answering all the questions. I appreciate the information. So now I had a question, like it's a very general question. What are the biggest bottlenecks that we as like a funder from IKEA Foundation that we need to tackle? Is it mainly finance, or is it skill, technical training? Would you have any reflections on that? Like, where would you need us most?
I'll jump in first if no one else does. finances are the clear one. Pay-as-you-go solar lenders, investors just drop their pants when it gets to 3 years or longer. There is no long-term funding. You can't get 3, 4, 5, 6 year lending for these more powerful bits of equipment. And the longer you can amortize something over, the more affordable and cheaper the service is going to become. And I would suggest that we even look at just systems where you don't have a classic pay-as-you-go. You just lease it. And it's just pay per use. And you get whatever revenue you get. And you stop thinking about formal lending terms in a microfinance loan sense. And just put the infrastructure there. And it might take a bit of time to pick up and see how people use it. We need patient capital. And maybe commercial capital will come in and fund the first 1 or 2 or 3 years, but we need truly patient capital, as the solar mini grid guys are getting. No mini grid pays off in 3 years. So the capital is there, but it really does need to be a bit patient if it's going to be affordable for people. But even just some of the guys making stuff like water pumps, just the manufacturers, and ourselves are in that basket a bit, even that doesn't exist too much. If we bring some great products to Gogla in October and suddenly we're snowballed with demand, where do we find the next $1 million or $2 million of working capital? It doesn't drop out of the sky fast enough to meet demand. I had that same problem with solar LED lights in Barefoot Power for 6 years. It took me 60 separate investments to raise $6 million. Brutal. So are we going to go through that again for productive uses?
Yeah.
Solar water pump guys should be drowning in capital. They're doubling people's income, and they're not.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that is, when you're looking structurally at how philanthropy and others can make a significant impact, one of the reasons why those longer tenor loans don't exist, and maybe a replacement or a sort of complement to why, or what Stuart just said is results-based financing has been the key instrument to help get last mile reachable for the solar home system space, for clean cooking across the continent for over a decade. In Africa, we've seen success after success after success. In Southeast Asia, it's the same thing. When you're dealing with like highly quantifiable individual goods with individual prices, lowering the cost or incentivizing purchase and delivery in certain places through RBF is a way to radically improve distribution, logistics, business operations for those hard to reach areas. I'll go back to my example of Congo. In the DRC, there are no roads to some of these million-person cities, and you have to use boats. Well, the cost will be 300 or 400% the retail cost in Europe for all those products, unless we have a way to deliver them at scale. And you're not going to get a commercial investor, even the most socially oriented impact investor. You're not going to get an impact investor interested in that proposition because it's not a proposition. It looks like a charity to them. And the more difficult to reach the area, the more the higher the cost, right? And so right now, since we're at the nascent stage of this PUE revolution, which I hope we can start to call it that, those distances are even shorter. The cost to bringing stuff to even rural communities that are not that far away is still very high because you have the business building costs associated with them now, right? Like just having a logistics problem is a luxury for someone working on productive uses. Right now, we have the problem of who's going to fund the core business, who's going to fund the experimentation, who's going to fund the R&D, who's going to fund all this. And the productive use sector is sort of where SHS as a sector was 7 or 8 years ago. And when you're starting to look at how do we commodify and commercialize what Stuart's talking about, we can't just have AgSol and Village Infrastructure Angels. We need 50 of those companies And how to incentivize building 50 of those companies is we have to put financial incentives in place, and we have to have investors who know what these companies are. And right now, Stuart needed 60 different investors because investors don't understand Stuart's business, and they don't understand EnerGrow either. So there's a couple of strong signals that philanthropy can play by sending big messages to say, like, we believe in this product as the future, or this sector as the future, and we're going to put support down in either as RBFs or as corporate support, etc. But one of the big issues is that we have a chicken and egg scenario now, where there's so few companies focused in a dedicated manner to just productive uses, that there's also a lack of investors, because it's easy to invest in a solar water pumping company, and we'll just use Sun Culture because they closed around a couple months ago and they're doing well, but they actually lack just distribution companies. They're trying to move into Uganda right now, and there's not a lot of partners for them to work with because there's not a lot of people doing this. So just sending the signal that there's money for PUE in a big way, and there's not just money for a technology, but there's money for the spectrum of companies working on PUE would be very, very important. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Aaron. I think those are really great points. And I think on your last point, Aaron, I just want to add that with this point about products, or so many of these products just not being market ready, I think last mile distribution is not just about putting out a technically perfect product. It's about putting out a sellable product that really meets the needs of consumers. And I think distributors are frustrated because they're expected to figure out everything else around the product. So they're expected to figure out the market, the sales process, the financing, but with zero R&D support. And that's just not realistic. And sometimes at the end of the day, it turns out that some of these super hot products that have, a bunch of money has gone into getting these products developed are actually just not sellable. And distributors have shouldered all of the cost and risk in figuring that out. So I think that is another really big gap. I am conscious of time, but there's one more great question in the chat, which I'd love to hear our panelists' feedback on, is around quality. So how is the question of quality addressed in your implementation? Because there is not an equivalent of Verisol for a lot of PUE product categories. So how do we recognize or filter good quality products? I love that question. Who would like to take that one on?
I would like to say something quick on that. And it gets to another pet peeve of mine that Russell mentioned before, and that is, do we need to recreate every product out there again for the PUE market? Do we have to put a pay-as-you-go SIM card into a circular saw or into a welding machine? Which adds cost and requires time and effort to do that. Actually, there are good quality standards for most commodified products that we would consider PUE. There's quality standards for agricultural processing products. There's quality standards for everything that Bosch and Makita make, those carpentry and vocational tools, top of the line. And they're cheaper than inventing something specifically for a market with a pay-as-you-go add-on to it. So, and they have warranties. They have serviceable warranties. There is a Bosch distribution center in Kampala and in Nairobi, and you can get your warranty service there. And if you, as a distribution company, work with quality products.
And that's it from Aaron. All right, well, we are at time. I feel like we could have kept this conversation going for much, much longer. So we will have to end it there. But thank you very, very much to our exceptional speakers. That was fascinating. And I think we're going to launch a quick feedback poll just to hear if this webinar was as fascinating for you as it was for me. Just a reminder that we do have a research piece coming out in mid-July to capture a lot of these insights and lessons. If you are a distribution company and you want to contribute to that output, I would love to hear from you. Alternatively, if you have recommendations of companies that you think we should be speaking to who can contribute insights, then please do share. Otherwise, thank you so much all for joining, and have a good rest of day.
Thank you.